What's up, you wonderful people? Wondrous Lantern here, back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about misconceptions regarding the Green Lantern powers and or their rings and or just the basic functions surrounding the Green Lantern IP. Before we begin today's video, there will be slight spoilers for the films Justice League of America, Green Lantern, Superman, Green Lantern Emerald Knights, Green Lantern First Flight, and Spider-Man No Way Home. And I'll be delving a little bit into the Emerald Twilight comics storyline. Well, I figured I'd start my analysis or media coverage series with Green Lantern since I gushed down that superhero a bit in my last video. I want it to be known that even though the video's title only has Green Lantern in it, some of the topics will be regarding most of the other colors, from blue, yellow, red, etc. For all intents and purposes going forward, I'm no comic book expert, nor would I claim to be some all-knowing Green Lantern fan. I would put myself somewhere a little bit beyond the initiate stage, but not at the level of some DC lore master. I'm nowhere near as knowledgeable. Yet. I've consumed a moderate amount of Green Lantern content over the years, delving between the Ryan Reynolds live-action film to some animated shows and films here and there. I own several comic books surrounding the IP, and I've read quite a bit of Green Lantern lore for many years as well. To the layman, I'm probably seen as fairly knowledgeable, or understanding of the Green Lantern IP in general. I'm sorry if that comes off as boastful, and that's not my intent. Fans will be fans after all. Batman fans will tell you the same, Spider-Man fans will say the same as well. And I find that anyone who's a nerd or geek, categories I definitely fall under, nerd, knows exactly what I'm talking about. Comic book fans will come together and celebrate their knowledge or love for a certain character or a set of characters and will debate these topics because, you know, we're passionate about these sorts of things. What I'm trying to say is even though I'm covering a few topics about the Green Lantern powers, I'd urge you not to just take my word as the all-encompassing truth on the subject and to go out there and research these topics yourself. If you're interested. Of course, I'm only human, so I'll strive to always do better, though I have no delusions that I won't stumble or fall every now and then, just so I can learn from my mistakes and pick myself up again. Anyways, I want to do this video to cover up some misconceptions or a few topics I've heard regarding the Green Lantern powers. There are also some points from people that I'd argue are bad, or just don't make sense when you apply what I'm going to cover in today's video. This isn't focused on anybody or any group in particular. I've just heard several bad takes or uninformed arguments over the years, and some have even spurted out more due to the recent 2025 James Gunn film Superman, where Nathan Fillion plays an iteration of Guy Gardner, one of the human Green Lanterns in the DC Comics. The first misconception or point I wish to cover is one that kind of irks me every time I hear or read it, and this is regarding the human lanterns. Their constructs are boring and human. So the reason why this one irks me a bit is because if you actually stop to think about it, you realize this argument doesn't hold any water. Why would any human lantern construct anything outside of what they know? In fact, why would any alien lantern construct anything outside of what they know? You see, lantern constructs take time and training to master. Focus, discipline, and willpower are extremely necessary for any lantern because these are core parts of how constructs work. If it wasn't like this, then constructs would constantly be made regardless of a lantern's focus or willpower. To explain further, our minds are constantly moving, and even idle thoughts are ever changing. If it was just something as simple as think about this, then constructs would be made all the time. Images, or perhaps objects pulled from childhood memories, would appear out of nowhere. And the list just doesn't stop there. But I hope you get my point. Lanterns need to know what they're going to construct, the size of said construct, sometimes even the quantity, and where the construct should be. All of this again requires focus, discipline, and willpower. It would be a waste of time for lanterns to try and construct something foreign to them in the heat of battle, where every second counts, and one wrong move can be the deciding factor between life or death. Let me expand on this point a little further. Let's say you have a split-second decision to make while you're in the heat of battle. An enemy is in front of you. They have a blade. They're about to stab you. Do you try to think of something foreign or something that you don't know how to construct in that moment just to look cool or be cool? No. You would think of something that you already instinctually know and are familiar with to construct in a way to block that attack. Also, this argument is kind of built on the notion that human constructs aren't good enough. I'm sorry, but not to sound too American here, but I have yet to see a problem that can't be fixed with gun. all jokes aside, I don't really understand why a lot of these human constructs are bad in these situations. When even in the Green Lantern series, you can watch alien lanterns make guns of their own. And because it's alien, it's good, but human, it's bad. It's weird. All right, Lantern. Okay, breathe. Just collect yourself. All right, let's get back to the topic. For the most part, if it gets the job done, it gets the job done. Literal cubes and spheres have been constructed, and people don't seem to mind those. Yet anytime a gun or a sword is constructed, it rubs them the wrong way. Why? These concepts aren't inherently human in nature. Plenty of alien species in DC and even other media like Halo or Star Trek have weapons similar to our own. There are plenty of examples of alien lanterns constructing their own guns and melee weapons, like when Sinestro made a bow. Here's an action figure found on thebrightestday.net of Sinestro with a sword and shield. My point being, just because something is of human design or similar doesn't make it necessarily bad, nor does it take away their validity in situations where such things are needed. Another failing of this viewpoint is clear when you think of the question, does it really matter if it was alien? Like this panel, does it really matter if Hal Jordan made an Earth jet instead of an alien jet? Or this motorcycle, does it really matter that it's an Earth motorcycle and not just some alien vehicle? How about when Kyle Rayner made this car? Does it really matter that it's of human design? Like I said before, if it gets the job done, it gets the job done. Wanting it to be fancy or alien or just different when it doesn't have to is kind of silly. Now, to extend an olive branch here, there's something I live by when I critique something, and that is context matters. I can definitely see the argument could be made for human lanterns who have been around alien species and constructs before. That's a perfect point, and I concede that this is definitely a possibility. And on the other end, I can totally see why some people would have a misconception regarding aliens who construct human design. Context matters. So usually when those aliens are creating something of human origin or design, they're doing it because either A, they actually are familiar with Earth, which is actually a huge thing in the Green Lantern universe, or B, they're doing it for the comfort of the other person.
We thought the trip might be easier for you in a more earthly construct.
I guess I should have started off by saying that most of these complaints I see are regarding live action films. Complaints like, Ryan Reynolds wasn't that creative, or Guy Gardner is so much cooler than Hal Jordan because he constructed middle fingers. Okay, that one was kind of an exaggeration, but I've definitely read certain things around those lines and my point still stands. To those people, I have to say, do you not know what an origin story is? What they fail to understand is that in the Ryan Reynolds 2011 film, he's starting his Green Lantern journey. Even the film itself shows how he struggles to construct things, especially designs foreign to him. You can actually see even later in these clips that he is able to construct things of human design way easier and quicker than, you guessed it, foreign or alien. Then he starts coming into his own. In the 1997 film Justice League of America, Guy Gardner may have had more experience being a lantern within the film's story, but even that shouldn't be grounds to say that he shouldn't construct things of human design. I've made this point before while replying to some people regarding the 2025 Superman film, where Guy Gardner constructs his giant hands, some of them flipping the bird, to get rid of tanks and vehicles. First, I'd like to say, in context, this works. Guy Gardner has that type of personality within the film, not all too dissimilar from his comic book counterpart. I have no issue with the hands here. What I do have issue with is how some people are taking the scene and saying he's so creative and better than Hal Jordan, without actually understanding what they're saying. Future Lantern here, and while editing, I realized that I didn't make this one point very clear. That is, when people are comparing Guy Gardner to Hal Jordan, they're talking about the movies from the Superman 2025 to the Ryan Reynolds one in 2011. Just thought I should make that clear here. Believe it or not, even some of those people from the aforementioned argument have made the claim that at least Guy Gardner's constructs aren't quote-unquote boring and are quote-unquote creative. To which I have to reply,
You serious?
Seriously, if I have to point out exactly why this is laughable, then I'm concerned for those individuals who 100% believe this point. I'm gonna have to point out the flaws here, aren't I? All right, here goes nothing. Saying the constructs in this scene are creative is truly baffling. They're hands. They're not even alien hands or animal appendages. They're human hands, and I would take a guess that they're structured after his very own hands since he'd be very familiar with those. And like I said before, this works. If it gets the job done, it gets the job done. No problem with that. But I'd like to point out for this argument of creativity, technically speaking, Gardner could have used any shape or structure in this moment to get the job done. Why not steel pillars? Why not catapults facing away? In fact, many Green Lanterns could probably just use simple geometric shapes or hands to solve most situations anyways, but they don't need to. Speaking of simple geometric shapes, Gardner creates a cube to protect a child and some sort of large polygonal room to speak to Superman. He also makes a megaphone, a muzzle for a kaiju, oven mitts, and the hands as previously discussed. All of human design, by the way. The only real alien thing I can think of was his tri-prong forcep eye poker thing, but even then you can find similar designs like that here, here, and here. Actual medical tools we use. Again, and I cannot stress this enough, the hands are fine in the scene and aren't what's being critiqued here. It's the lengths that some people will go to just to be in the bandwagon, or failing to see that what's actually being said doesn't make much sense. Gardner's constructs may be cool to some and in character for him, but claiming that they're more creative than Hal Jordan's is a bit of a stretch. I'm sorry if this came off a little negative or ranty, and that really wasn't my point. Obviously, I threw some jokes and kind of like slight jabs. It's not coming from a place of hate, but it's just one of those topics that I've heard for so long, and it's weird because you can kind of apply that reverse thinking to almost any superhero. You can say the same about Batman or Superman or Spider-Man or Wolverine or pretty much anyone. You can always find some type of way to say one version is better than the other or one type of adaptation is better than the other. But the points that I was making, I hope that you guys understand, and I understand this is all about misconceptions. And honestly, I think that is a big misconception, because one aspect of the Green Lantern powers, or the Lantern powers in general, is the fact that it's based off of the individual Lantern. It's not necessarily something based on the rings themselves. So I touch up on that a little bit more later on in this video, but I just wanted to leave this part off saying this is, it's fun to think that Guy Gardner could beat Hal Jordan, or Guy Gardner is more creative than Hal Jordan. And that's fine. That's a great stance you can take. You're more than welcome to. But I think a lot of people, when they look at these type of debates or they look at these arguments, they take very minute or small pieces of these arguments, but they're missing the full context, the full scope of the situation at hand. But anyways, I'm going to get on to my next topic. Do constructs need to be tethered to the ring? For clarification, people are talking about the actual tether depicted in comics and shows like this tether. This is an interesting topic and one that actually tickled my brain while I was doing some mild research for this video. Even though I was fairly certain, 99% certain, that constructs didn't need to physically be shown as tied to the power ring, it was nice to actually delve into this topic since I never actually sat down and thought about it myself. It is true that some, and I'd say most, imagery involving Green Lanterns and their construct, that there's some sort of illustrated link between the ring and the construct. as previously shown here. However, this isn't always the case, as you can see here. I'm sorry, Batman. The elevator door Hal Jordan constructed here has no tether linked to his ring. In the other image, you can see Bye Bye Bats floating against the glass without any tethers shown. Even in the new movie, there are no links between Gardner's ring and the hands. Now, I know what you're thinking. How come there are instances where a tether is shown and in other instances there aren't? Well, I'd honestly just say that this comes down to artistic choice. I believe that in most iterations, it boils down to the artist showing that the constructs are coming from the power ring. Sure, the constructs being the same color of the respective rings, green for Green Lanterns, blue for Blue Lanterns, etc., can be interpreted as coming from the power ring too. But I don't see the issue of there being a tether in some instances and no tether in others, nor does it seem that there are any hard rule sets regarding this topic. Another thing to keep in mind is that sometimes a visual representation of a tether is necessary when multiple lanterns are shown and the audience needs to know which construct belongs to which lantern. Perhaps not in full-scale battle scenes, but in smaller scenes where a lantern saves another with a few other lanterns shown as well. I know that gestures generally get this point across too, the iconic one where a lantern holds out their limb, but I wouldn't mind seeing a tether in a scene even when there's a gesture if it's meant for the artistic choice. I'd have to say that the artistic choice argument is pretty strong when one considers just how annoying or overstimulating it could be for the audience to see a bunch of tethers all at once. Massive lantern battles would be riddled with colored lines going everywhere, and that can be overwhelming or even unappealing to the audience. It could also be terrible visually because it can detract or wash out what's really going on in those moments. Obviously, I'm not saying that this should always be the case, and there have been instances where constructs are linked or are massive. But again, those are usually artistic choices that enhance the visuals, like this image of John Stewart with a background of many soldiers, or this image of many Green Lanterns using beams. In both these cases, I'd say that these are artistic choices to enhance the visual. You can see that in most of these cases that the amount of constructs themselves either has empty backgrounds, like the void of space, or backgrounds you'd see in any other media, like mountain ranges or just skies. I'd also like to point out that while technically linked, some have claimed that the colored aura or energy coming off of lantern constructs are telepathic tethers, meaning they're not visible yet are tethered to the power rings themselves, and that's totally a valid answer as well. The conclusion that I can come to about this question is that the visual tether isn't some strict rule, and not to sound like a broken record here, entirely an artistic choice, either to enhance or show the visuals necessary to get the point across. So to answer the question of do constructs need to be tethered, I'd say it's more up for artistic choice and the context of the scene at hand. Alright, moving on. Next topic is, how does recharging work? This is one I found myself asking very early on when I started being a Green Lantern fan, and I'll be honest, from going into some deeper research for this video, I found that the very mechanics changed somewhere. Meaning that one mechanic was the way recharging was done in the past, but now there's a newer mechanic, so I'll try to cover both. From what I've gathered, the mechanics of the past are as follows. 1. They required a recharge every planetary rotation, where the lantern was at the time. So if a lantern was on Earth, they'd have to recharge every 24 hours. 2. It didn't really matter how much energy was expended so long as the lantern did their 24-hour recharge. The new mechanics are as follows, again, from what I've gathered. 1. The rings retain a set charge per recharge, much like a cell phone's battery can hold only a set amount, as crude as that comparison may be. 2. This forces lanterns to be more mindful of recharging, making it less of just a daily ritual, and more like something that lanterns should remember to do whenever they have the time. There's another mechanic that I found, and I couldn't really find anything that says both the past and the new methods of recharging didn't share, so I'll put it here. It seems like the oath is used while recharging for the lantern to give an arbitrary amount of time for recharge. This isn't necessary, and many lanterns modify their oaths, but it is still something worth noting. I can totally see the validity of this practice considering the power rings or lanterns don't have any numerical values displayed during a recharge, making it somewhat difficult for a lantern to know exactly when a ring is recharged. I'd like to add that I really like this detail, and I find it kind of funny because it's similar to how we sing nursery rhymes while brushing our teeth. What's interesting about this recharge mechanic of lantern rings is that each color can have its own drawbacks or advantages than others. Blue lanterns can charge or even overcharge a Green Lantern's ring, something I found fascinating while I was putting this video together. Orange, yellow, and red lantern rings seem to have a weakness against blue lantern energy, either it being the orange lanterns can absorb their energy, Yellow Lantern's energy being disrupted, or Red Lantern's being quote unquote depowered. To get into all the ways they can power up or recharge or affect each other's could be an entire video of its own, and probably way too long for me to dive into here. Suffice it to say that the various lantern colors can affect each other in a multitude of ways, not just their energies and the mechanics thereof. As far as recharging or the energy is affecting the rings is concerned, it should be known that most of the Lantern Corps lanterns, or tribe if you're Indigo, are connected to their respective central power battery. Green for the Green Lantern Corps, blue for the Blue Lantern Corps, and so on and so forth. The lanterns, the devices used to charge the rings, act as extensions of these central power batteries that can reach through the vastness of the universe. For easier access, and in some iterations, these lanterns are hidden away in pocket dimensions by the ring bearer, and so they cannot be stolen. And now on to our final misconception of today's video. I can't believe yellow affects Green Lanterns. What a joke. I'm pretty sure I'm not the only Green Lantern fan to find this statement funny, yet untrue. It's like we can laugh at ourselves and take it in jest, but there's some people out there who seem to bring this up to me as if it's true, and that's why I'm touching on this subject. Now, before I get some Green Lantern fans come charging at me saying, but yellow does affect Green Lanterns, or yellow is fear, and fear erodes will, please put down your torches and pitchforks and allow me to clarify. I'm pointing out that some people make the extreme argument that anything yellow is just automatically going to work against a Green Lantern. But if that's the case, then how would any Green Lantern ever fight any Yellow Lantern? Why is it that some Green Lanterns are able to come out on top after fighting a Yellow Lantern? If yellow energy, and by extension the color itself, is some sort of trump card to be used against any Green Lantern, then how come is it this hasn't actually been the case for decades? To delve further, I understand that yellow energy was actually way worse on Green Lanterns in the past, but this was due to Parallax being sealed inside the Green Lantern power battery, essentially making him a parasite within the battery's energy. This is why Guardians tried to find new recruits who were less susceptible to fear, because it would allow them to actually combat that energy. Parallax managed to possess Hal Jordan during the Emerald Twilight series in 1994, and was released from the battery during the possession, rendering the weakness of yellow energy no more. Okay, so I'll concede that yes, in some iterations, especially those of the past, the argument can be made that yellow definitely impacts a Green Lantern. But I'm of the belief within the fandom that it's actually kind of good that they got rid of this weakness, because I believe it opens up a whole can of worms, much like the questions I asked before. I'm not going to dive too deep into this, but I do want to at least give my own thoughts on this and try to leave you with something to think about. If you agree with me, cool. If not, that's fine too. But please don't just disregard my viewpoints as false before seriously listening and pondering what I have to say. I've been corrected many times in my life, and yeah, it sucks every time, but a lot of the time, after reflecting on what was said, I could easily see the points being offered to me. So, with that said, here's a little bit of the can of worms regarding this whole yellow mess. This point is only to address the extremist crowd, the ones who think that yellow is the end-all to any Green Lantern, period. If we're seriously going to come to the extreme conclusion that Green Lanterns cannot affect yellow energy or the color yellow itself, then we have to concede that Sinestro is pretty stupid. If it's the case that he technically is untouchable under these circumstances, then I have a hard time believing that he alone couldn't just overthrow the Green Lanterns. Even though Green Lanterns have allies, they also have enemies, and Sinestro and his Yellow Lanterns are more than a capable force against the Green Lantern Corps as it stands. That would be like an army of Dr. Manhattans fighting against Earth's smartest termites.
The world's smartest man poses no more threat to me than does its smartest termite.
The argument could be made that Sinestro wasn't yellow during the Emerald Twilight arc, and I definitely understand, but this doesn't change the larger scope here, nor does it address the multitude of examples when Green Lanterns fight Yellow Lanterns. If yellow is truly the ultimate answer against Green Lanterns, then how come Sinestro is stopped sometimes, like in the film Green Lantern First Flight, where Hal Jordan sends Sinestro flying down to a planet's surface after blasting his yellow shield with his own green beam. In fact, there are several moments in the film's finale where Hal uses his own constructs against Sinestro, even coming to blows sometimes, which I'd have to add that they have their own colored auras here. So again, if yellow renders green totally useless, how can this outcome be true? Remember, I'm speaking to the extremist crowd here, so I don't want it to seem like I'm not understanding of the nuanced take that in some iterations, Green Lanterns can and have been weakened or affected by yellow. This is fine and one I definitely agree with, but I seriously, as a Green Lantern fan or nerd in general, cannot take the notion that yellow is the ultimate weakness to Green Lanterns in all circumstances seriously. I'd like to end this part here saying that I'm also understanding that usually it's just a troll take or buddies having a good chuckle whenever this is said to me, the same way the jokes about Batman's greatest weaknesses are being poor or the sight of pearl necklaces or Catwoman. Okay, let's face it, that one's a legitimate take. Or like when we joke about Superman's weakness being a space rock, or Deadpool's is Spider-Man. Again, a legitimate take. The point is that I know this is mostly in jest, but the reason why I bring up that yellow weakness topic is because there are people out there who believe that all yellow is every Green Lantern's weakness all the time, and something about that just doesn't sit right with me. One of the aspects surrounding the Green Lantern IP I've found very fascinating over the years is that both the strengths and weaknesses come from the individual wearing the ring, not just something inherently wrong with the rings themselves. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I find lanterns so appealing. The constructs are personal and are based on one's wearing the ring. Sure, there are times when these heroes have shared construct ideas, like those geometric shapes I talked about earlier, but anything dealing in complexity or less basic are usually personalized. If you see a jet created of green energy, it's a safe bet that it's Hal's construct. Anything nerdy and more artistic usually belongs to Kyle Rayner. Before retcon, John Stewart was an architect, so he would know how to construct buildings differently than other lanterns who wouldn't have had that knowledge. This ties back to my first topic, the one about human constructs being boring, but that's subjective, and these people are thinking of what they would do with a power ring instead of the characters they're watching. Of course, we're going to theorize and think of what we would do with powers we see, but that shouldn't take away from the experience being shown, and I think that ultimately defeats the point. If the characters all did make the same constructs, then someone would complain that there's no distinction between a character's creativity and another's. Yet, when it's shown that characters can have distinct constructs varying in both levels of creativity and personality, some people want the other characters to be the exact same in those regards. It's a situation where people will complain about anything so long as they're complaining. I'm not saying that lanterns cannot share in ideas and their constructs, but there has to be some level of distinction for the character's sake. To further this point, I think one of the coolest details in Spider-Man No Way Home is the moment when the three Spider-Men web swing together in the movie's finale. Each has a different style, and some have said that their webs look different. Holland's Spidey takes the lead, well, since this is his universe, and he's the one who's coordinating the final attack, giving each Spider-Man a specific designation. Garfield's Spidey does a flip, which feels on par for what we've seen his Peter would do, both stylistically and attitude-wise. Maguire's Spidey, though straightforward at first, only doing a little nosedive, manages to keep up with the other two, but in fact, not just keep up, but he later is the first one to land. I think they did it intentionally to show his expertise and his experience being the longest running Spider-Man of the three. I didn't want to go off on a long talk about Spider-Man since we're discussing the Green Lantern powers, but I feel like I need to give some comparison for you to understand the lens in which I'm viewing this topic. Of course, not every comparison is going to be one-to-one, but that's kind of how all comparisons are. Otherwise, they wouldn't be comparisons. They'd be identical, which a comparison wouldn't be needed. What I'm saying is that it's vital for characters to be, characterized, especially if they share similarities in powers. I know there are differences in my comparison, the chief one being that in No Way Home, they're all iterations of Peter Parker, and in the Green Lantern universe, Guy Gardner is a different entity than Hal Jordan, or John Stewart, or Kyle Rayner, or Simon Baz. Baz? I'm sorry if I'm butchering that name, but I've always called him Baz. Despite this major difference in comparison, the point still stands. Though each Spider-Man is a Peter Parker, they're still different enough for the story to go forward and easier to follow without being bogged down by who's who here. The same would apply if Hal Jordan and Guy Gardner shared the same screen. There should be distinctions between the two, not just in character, but in their abilities as well. I hope I covered all I could regarding these topics. There's a lot of ground to cover regarding pretty much any comic book's lore, but I really wanted to get these points out there for the uninitiated or those who are as interested in Green Lantern's lore as much as I am. Also, I definitely wanted to clear up a few things regarding some of the topics or misconceptions. Seriously, topic 1 still irks me just thinking about it. As I've said before, I'm by no means an expert and would strongly suggest you read the lore as much as I try to do, which is something I would suggest in any situation, regardless if you agree with me or not. That concludes today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if I did my job correctly, I've left you guys asking questions or have clarified something you may have already been questioning for a while. If you just clicked on this video because you're already a fan of the IP and either knew these things or hold similar viewpoints, that's awesome. Perhaps just knowing that there's another passionate Green Lantern fan out there is grounds to watch this video. And you know what? That's awesome too. I feel like I should have brought this up in my channel going forward video, so I'll say it here, and hopefully I don't have to say this again in the future. Hopefully. If you don't agree with some or all of my viewpoints, I definitely wouldn't be surprised considering how expansive and diverse we can be as humans. But please understand that expressing your viewpoints without backing them up with details or evidence could easily divulge into a nuh-uh, yeah, huh discussion, and that's just not something I'm interested in being part of. Of course, I cannot control what you do, and you're free to express what you want to express. However, there are caveats to this line of thinking, and I want to make one thing clear. I'd rather have a mutually respectful conversation on a topic rather than have to go in circles explaining why I view things the way I view them. I've had plenty of those nuh-uh, yeah, huh conversations in middle school, high school, and post-high school, if you can believe that. And in my experience, they never feel fulfilling or satisfying at the end of the day. I never feel like I got my point across in a good way, nor did they get theirs. And as I've said before, I've had my mind changed many times in my life on similar topics, and I've changed someone else's mind in the same way. It definitely wasn't because of a circular and, frankly, childish way of discussing things. It was when we were able to express our viewpoints with evidence or details that either party may have either never considered or flat out overlooked. I'll leave this point off with this. I think it's better to have a quality conversation because, to me, they're more fulfilling and tickle my brain when someone changes my mind. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's similar in this regard. Anyways, I hope you all have a great day, and as always, stay wonderful.